I'm Tharangi Ramacharaka. This will be video number 3 in my little playlist called Problems in Self-Mastery. In this one, I'm going to focus on the problem that some self-mastery students may encounter. And that problem could be stated as follows. This isn't going exactly as I thought it would. And I am also going to address the difficulty of self-mastery with respect to not just the difficulty of the work, but trying to make the material easy while also making it difficult. And the reasons for that. All right, first of all, the first topic. This isn't going the way I thought it would go. I kind of touched on this in the first video here in this playlist. Problems in self-mastery. Let's say a client is very left brain hemisphere oriented. Most people are. I mean, what with the way we're brought up in this world, in the public school system, we end up being quite left brain oriented. So let's say a person is left brain oriented, and self-mastery necessarily involves left and right hemisphere balance. So the information and the practice is going to be geared toward reaching a balance, and this is going to be this will necessarily then involve information and techniques that a person might not click well with in all cases, because they're expecting, without knowing it, kind of methods and practices that really pander to the left hemisphere of the brain. So they're getting something new. They're getting information in a slightly new way than they ever have before, or nearly ever have before. And it might turn them off a little bit, because they're not used to this. You know, this is something different. It makes it difficult to stick with. That's one way to describe that this is not going the way I thought it would. Also, self-mastery involves some deep character changes, and it involves breaking through some perceptual barriers. It involves changing our consciousness. Now, let's say somebody comes to me and they're 35 years old and they've been used to seeing the world in a certain way. They've remained as open-minded as they can, but it's within a perceptual frame, it's within a set of perceptual parameters, and we're breaking those barriers. Well, this can take some extreme techniques. Now, in my program, I am not out to break anybody's brain. I am not out to drive anybody crazy. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. But there have been techniques used by people who are much better at this than I am that have been extreme, very extreme, and they have worked. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of a person who came from an Ivy League institution as a professor, went to India in search of his guru, let's say. Well, during one phase of his search, he ran into a Raja Yoga teacher. Raja Yoga has been sometimes called the royal path to self-actualization, or the royal yoga, whatever. It has many aspects in itself, and one main way to describe Raja Yoga is that it is the science of, let's say, mental discipline. Well, things did not go as this person expected when he met a Raja Yoga teacher. This teacher didn't say anything to him. It's just some skinny guy without many teeth, as I recall. Some skinny, lanky-looking fellow who would show up whenever this guy felt like it, with a little slate and a piece of chalk, and write some phrase on the slate and show it to the guy, the guy from the United States, this Ivy League professor who actually was trained in clinical psychology. He was a professor of psychology. He had his idea about how things work when it comes to the mind. But he was open. He was open enough to go to India and find out how they do it. And he wanted it for himself. He wasn't just there on a sabbatical, doing research. No, this was his personal venture. But, of course, his way of thinking, his way of perceiving, and his ideology, his whole paradigm of mental operations had to be broken apart. Well, this Raja Yoga teacher showed up with this slate, and he wrote odd phrases on it. Phrases that didn't really mean much to this guy, to the student, to this professor who is now a student. And he started thinking, man, what the hell is this? This guy's writing these odd phrases, just groups of words on a slate board, and then walking away. And I don't know if I'm ever going to see him again. And then he'll show up as I turn a corner, a couple days later, and write something else on there and show it to me, hold it up to, and show it to me. And I'll read it, and I'll ask something, and he will just walk away, leaving me with this phrase, This is nonsense. And this continued for some while. And none of it really fit together in any way for him. One day this teacher showed up and motioned for our friendly university professor, psychology professor, to come along. So he follows this guy out into the woods, pretty far from anything, and there in the middle of the woods in a little clearing stands a little box. Kind of looked like an outhouse, an old wooden outhouse. And it's really just a box, big enough to sit in. And there was some food and water in there. And the lanky dude motions for our friend to go on in there. Well, he went in, and the lanky guy shut the door and locked it from the outside and left. Not a word said. So, in there's our professor friend all day, all night, all the next day, all the next night. He was in there for days. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't hear anybody outside. He tried yelling for a while. There was no answer. Nobody was around. He started to get scared. As you can imagine, he went through all sorts of mental states. As a matter of fact, he reports that he went through a sequence of mental disturbances, psychological disturbances, that, well, by the end of it, perhaps a week later, he had gone through pretty much every mental illness he knew. He experienced it. He totally broke down. As you can imagine. He went through depression, then he went through wild mood swings. He went through paranoia. He went through psychotic phases. I mean, it just completely all broke apart. And at the point at which he just mentally and emotionally, completely came to pieces. Utterly to pieces. His entire mental stability and emotional stability wiped out. Ian rushed. What do you think rushed in? All those things that were lying in his subconscious mind that this guy who locked him in there had been writing on that slate board. They now filled his mind. Filled his mind. And became the backbone, the structure around which his new mental stability and emotional stability and cognitive matrix, his way of perceiving things, his consciousness, reassembled around those phrases, and they all made sense because that's all that was left for him. And everything came back together in a whole new way, centered around the meanings of those phrases. He now understood them very clearly. And interestingly, he had made a huge step, and he knew it, a huge step toward much greater understanding of the cosmos, himself, his mind, how it works, and how to gain control over it. Because at that moment, the lanky dude approached and unlocked the door and let him out. He still didn't say anything, just let him out of the box. And to the best of my memory, they never saw each other again. But the method had worked. That's an extreme method. And I think our friend, the psychologist, would say, I didn't expect that. That's far different than what I expected. Well, I don't go to those extremes. But one problem that a client can encounter is that the training doesn't always go exactly as expected. Our friend from the Ivy League University, the psychology professor, is an extreme example of it not quite going the way you expect. I bring up that example just to make a point. A person can experience a little bit of difficulty with their training because it's not always going to go as expected. Excuse me. And another way that it won't go as expected has to do with the second thing I wanted to talk about here, that I am talking about here, the second topic, and that is making it easy for a client while also making it difficult. One of the difficulties with self-mastery in life is not knowing how in the world to do it. People used to say to me long ago things like, well, you need to learn how to just let things go. Or, you need to move on. You know, I know that this was a hard time for you in your life, but you need to move on. Well, such neat little maxims are neat little maxims, but they don't very much describe the how-to. They tell you the what, but they don't tell you the how-to. It used to be the case that people would say to me, you know, as I was a teenager, you need to take responsibility for yourself. Well, I understood what the words meant, but I didn't understand what in the world they were talking about. At another level, what? What do you mean? If I would ask, what do you mean? They'd look at me like I was being a wise ass and not tell me what they actually mean by that. Once I got that figured out, then my question would be, okay, but how? How do I do that? Tell me how. And once again, they'd look at me like I'm being a wise ass or like I'm just stupid. Same with things like, Well, you need to move on. You know, you know, she wasn't the right girl for you anyway. You need to move on. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, for God's sake, boy, and move on. But they did not tell me how you do that. How do you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? How do you do it? Similarly, with self-mastery, a person can be so confused, going to shrinks, going to counselors, taking psych meds and so forth. Well, the psych meds don't tell a person how to get control over the mind. The psychotherapists don't tell you. Neither do the counselors. They don't really tell you that. Oh, they'll discuss your weekly issues. They'll put you in a group session where you can listen to other people talk about their issues and how they worked through them. But still, the issues keep coming up. And when one issue is done with, there's another one. And some years can pass and still the person is wondering, is anybody ever going to step up to the plate here and tell me how to get control over my thoughts? There must be a simple formula. There must be a secret to it. Come on. Tell me how to do it. So, it can be difficult to figure this out, especially if you're in a position where you need to figure it out. You need to figure out how to figure it out. And how do you figure that out? You see what I'm getting at? You kind of need somebody to come along and say, hey, look, I can tell you how to do that. I mean, you could be sitting there wondering, do I first get control over my over things like getting up and walking across the room and pay attention to that? Or do I learn how to get control of my attention so that I can learn how to do other things better? Or what do I approach first? How do I approach it? What do I do? Should I try to get control over my anger problem? Well, I don't know how to do that. I need to focus on that so I can figure that out. But I can't focus that well. I need help with focusing. Oh my God, I need help with everything. What do I start with first? How do I do it? So it can be difficult to figure it out. And to figure out what order to do things in. What's going to work best, especially when you're confused. When you need some self-mastery. Figuring out how to go about it is not within your grasp. So, it's the job of the person who's providing the help with it to simplify it, to break it down, to put it into steps, to provide the information necessary, and to provide the work required. To simplify it. Another thing that would make it difficult is if a person starts to research this on their own, while busy with the rigors of everyday life. Well, they could probably take the rest of their lives to figure out exactly what information is going to be most useful. They could try this, they could try that, and in large, end up with some things that help and a lot of things that don't. So they may dig deeper and find some more fundamental type stuff. They might try some more, let's say, various spiritual paths. Well, there are some traditions, Buddhism and Hinduism and so forth that do engage, do teach a little bit about how to get control over your thoughts and so forth, but then you have to be on some spiritual path or other. You have to pledge allegiance to some name of a god, or join some fraternity, or, for goodness sakes, join a certain church, or have a specific guru or some other one. Or how do you find that type of person? It gets to the point where it can wear a person out just trying to figure out what information is going to be helpful, there's so much of it. So a person who is helping another along these lines needs to really come along with a program that's simplified, with a program that has taken the best from here and the best from there and put it into a cohesive and coherent program that is put forth in simple terms, with simple, easy to follow steps. Aha. But at the same time, should it just be handed out? Made easy? Yes, on one hand, it should be simplified. It should be simple. It should be easy to follow. But on the other hand, it must be made difficult. This is the problem. How do you do both at the same time? And how does the person who is going through the training deal with that? Well, how to deal with it is to simply follow the instructions. How to administer it is the more difficult thing. Why should it be difficult? Because self-mastery itself is difficult. Making it not so easy at every turn is part of self-mastery training. There are points at which the administrator, the guide, the teacher, whatever, the trainer needs to test the client to make sure that they're really serious about this. To test whether all that they've done up to this point has been effective. So you put in, let's say, an apparent roadblock to see if this person knows how to navigate around it or to break through it. Because up till now, they've been given all that they all that they need in order to know how to do that. So this is kind of like a test here at this point, let's say. Kind of a checkpoint. There are also other checkpoints. Checkpoints of a person's ethical standing at this point in the game, in their progress in self-mastery. A person might have started out with a vague notion of cause and effect and how they use self-mastery is going to work with respect to cause and effect. But they needed to be more aware of cause and effect than what they started with. So at various points, you want to check. You're going to give them a test, let's say, of what they're going to do with their self-mastery training. How are they going to be using it? Put them to the test. Give them something difficult. Give them something, you've got to work this stuff out very carefully to see how they're going to react, see how they're going to respond, to see where they stand with their ethicalness. Because, quite honestly, the tools of self-mastery at some point are going to become a dual-edged sword. They can be used in such a manner that they can be very destructive or very constructive, one or the other. And as a person goes in their own self-mastery, because what they are doing is their own doing, they are creating the results. They are becoming more and more responsible for their thoughts and their emotions and their actions than they were before, because they are getting more control over them. So they're becoming more responsible. And the wise practitioner of a self-mastery training program, or the mindful practitioner, must bear in mind that he, like I, am responsible for the information I'm providing to this person. That person is responsible for what they're doing with it. So I must check to make sure at various points that my client has not gone astray with respect to their ethical application of what material I'm providing them. It becomes like a dual-edged sword, some of this, you know. If you develop ironclad willpower and laser-focused concentration, the powers of the mind are incredible. Gaining mastery over this stuff, over these things, can be dangerous to the person gaining control over themselves and other people. But built into the self-mastery training program should be increasing awareness of how this all works and why it must go in a one direction as opposed to another. But tests must be given to make sure that that's what's happening. And besides, it's been a long tradition that such training, bona fide training, has its steps of initiation all along the way. This does not mean imposed initiation steps by the person providing the training. These initiation steps happen in the person making the progress. It's just built in. It happens naturally. The person passes through doors, let's say, doors of conscious awareness, levels of understanding, inner powers, let's say, abilities, realizations, character changes, deep character changes. And all of these things, just as a matter of how the cosmos operates, have their tests. Let's say, just to bring in an almost absurd example of how this works is, let's say you were taking lessons in how to fly. And I don't mean in an airplane. I mean bodily. Let's say you could make your body become invisible. Somebody has taught you how to do that. And this person is very concerned about your welfare. They're teaching you this for your own self-improvement. But let's say you have a penchant for doing things that are naughty and mischievous. So, just before this person gives you the final lesson in how to become invisible, gives you a whole bunch of tests and doesn't tell you. So you find that suddenly this is becoming really bizarre and difficult. You're being put through all kinds of weird maneuvers. It's not going exactly the way you thought it would. Maybe you're being tested. If you pass the tests, you're given the final instruction on how to become completely invisible. But then once you know how to become completely invisible, and you learn how to fly, so that you can instantly, pretty much instantly go up to the 9th level of some building, invisible, and peer in people's windows. Would you do it? Or would you restrain yourself from invading people's privacy in such a manner, even though you're never going to get caught, and use your newfound abilities to be of assistance to others in ways that they'll never know, in accordance with some, let's say, intuitive feeling you have about what universal will would have you do. The person who just taught you how to become invisible and perhaps how to fly is going to put you through the tests, provide you with situations in which you could go the wrong way. There will be tests, even if this person who is administering the self-mastery, invisibility, flight ability training to you doesn't provide them himself. The universe will provide them. There will be tests. There will be great tests. With each new level of progress, there will be greater tests. They will just happen. We could label these problems in self-mastery, but they're not really problems. They are the way it has to go. They are benchmarks of progress. Self-mastery training is difficult. Here's an example. And then I'm going to end this video because it's been, we just passed the exact half-hour mark. There was a spinal breathing technique, a simple one. I won't say what it is here, but it's a simple one. It has to do with, it's a Kundalini yoga type thing, but it's one that has no chance of dangers involved, you know. No danger of rising the Kundalini too fast, let's put it that way, or before you're ready for it. It's an easy, simple thing to do, and if done every day for a long period of time, things can happen. Let's say weird entities could appear on the screen of your consciousness and stare you right in the face, and they can be very scary. This could happen. There's no guarantee that it will, but it could. The instructions say, the instructions to go with this spinal breathing technique say, any phenomena that occur, ignore it. Focus only on the technique. Any phenomena that result from it, ignore. Focus your attention back on exactly what you're doing so you can see. It's also a very, very powerful attention training technique because some of these things that could happen could be very distracting. And let's say you suddenly experience the ability to seemingly fly out of your body, and it feels wonderful. But the instructions say, focus only on the technique, not on any of its results. So what do? You see these things as tests. And you've already agreed to follow the instructions to the letter. The instructions do not say, get scared at these entities, stop doing the technique immediately, or go ahead, experience flying out of your body, have fun with it. No. The instructions say, ignore that stuff. Bring your focus back to what you are doing. Easily do that. As soon as you have mastered ignoring any entities that might appear in the screen of your consciousness, they probably stop appearing. Because you passed that test. You didn't get sidetracked. The goal of such a spinal breathing technique is not to experience entities appearing in the screen of your consciousness or the ability to seemingly fly out of your body. That's not the goal. Those aren't the goals. But those could be some diversions that could last you the rest of your life if you get caught up in them. They could make you lose your mind. Or they could attract your attention so that you get diverted from what you're really doing. And the reasons for your self-mastery training that you laid down in the first place. You could get way sidetracked, like a drug addiction, sidetracking you from what you really wanted to get done in life. These are some of the kinds of problems that can occur in self-mastery. Well, there will be tests. And it might not always go exactly as you thought. I'm Tharanki Ramacharaka. Be well.